Marvel Snap's newest OTA just dropped, and there are honestly a couple really baffling changes in this one. Let's get into it. First up, Sam Wilson getting a nerf is an absolute free space on the bingo card. Sam Wilson has been the enabler of Batroc decks since Batroc came out. Sam Wilson has been in every Aurora deck since Aurora came out. He has been flat out at various times the best 2-drop in the entire game, or simply the best synergy-based 2-drop in the entire game. I would expect absolutely nothing to happen to him as a result of this change. He is still the single best card to play on turn 2 in a Batroc deck. He is still significantly better than every other card you can play on turn 2 in an Aurora deck. I do not see any meaningful reason why this will actually make him weaker. This is just a change for the purpose of making a card that is egregiously strong, slightly more balanced. It's been 18 months of Sam Wilson being one of, if not the best 2-cost cards in the game, and he has constantly skated on this because he is not the card people remember beating them, despite the fact that he is the engine of one deck and a very powerful complementary piece in another. People like to blame the cards that get played later in the game for their losses, and so Sam Wilson remains as a card that has been egregiously powerful for an extended period of time, but just simply is not a card that is actually causing a lot of negative feelings about Marvel Snap. This is an astonishingly powerful card that will remain astonishingly powerful in the shells that it goes in. I do not think I'm cutting it from an Aurora deck. I do not think I'm cutting it from a Batroc deck. If they made it a 2-1, I still think I would say those exact same sentences. Sam Wilson is still going to be good. There is no real risk here if you are someone who has Sam Wilson. All the places you're playing him anyway are already the places that you're going to continue playing him in large part because while he is not the single best stats 2-drop anymore, he already kind of wasn't. If you were looking for a generic card, you were very often not playing Sam Wilson. But in this world, we are looking for something just a little bit more specific, whether that be because of Aurora or because you're a Batroc deck. You are always still putting Sam Wilson in those lists. This one is a long time coming. Mr. Fantastic First Steps gaining a point of power up to 3-5. And I think that this is a really interesting illustration of the differences between a 2-cost card and a 3-cost card. Because when they nerfed Mr. Fantastic First Steps to 2-2, I think it's very reasonable for them to say, okay, well, he's losing that 2 points of power that he would be generating on turn 2. Let's give it back to him. Let's make him a 3-4. We're nerfing him, but he's still in theory the same amount of power. The difference is at 2-cost, there are no cards that are really meaningfully competing with a 2-cost that can do what Mr. Fantastic First Steps does. And at 3-cost, there are tons. And at 3-cost, you also have to justify your own existence a lot more. The competition at 2 is a lot less powerful than the competition at 3. At 3, there are all sorts of cards that can genuinely, meaningfully win lanes. At 2, there are not. And so a card like Mr. Fantastic First Steps needs to be at the rate of a good enough card, that is to say 3-5, and then justify his own existence through the things that you're playing him with. Frankly, as much as I think this is another free space on a bingo card kind of change, that's just like, this is objectively good that they did it. I'm happy they did it. In the same way, taking a point of power off Sam is just like very clearly a good thing. They could have done it at any point in time, and it would have been totally justifiable, and I would have said the same stuff. I do think that this might not be enough to make Mr. Fantastic First Steps all that much better. That said, I do have a friend who I will allow to remain anonymous for now, who is a Pro Tour champion who is a big fan of Zombie Galacti. So he's a really good Magic player, and he thinks everyone has been building Zombie Galacti decks wrong. And one of the ways in which he thinks that is true is he thinks that they should have been playing more of this card the whole way. And now that it's gotten a buff, maybe we'll see if that actually ends up being something that can bear fruit in the wider Marvel Snap community. I've seen several opportunities to make the joke of like, oh, KMBest gets hired at second dinner and he's a contractor, and that contract has resulted in them buffing Strong Guy. But here's how you can tell that I was not consulted on this. I would have told them to 2-3 this card, because I think that a buff of Strong Guy to 3-4 does not meaningfully allow him to actually succeed. And I think that that is a weird thing to say about a card that is in theory a 310, but I think that a lot of cards that are in theory 310s are kind of a lot easier to mess with than Strong Guy is. Like, I would rather be doing Star Brand with Techno Organic Virus than I would this. And I think that also being a 310 conditional, I mean, that's cool, but like I could play Jane Foster, I could play something like a Kraglin. Those are 310s with much easier conditionals, sometimes even better, right? And their floors are higher. And all of that is to say that I don't think this meaningfully changes a single thing about Strong Guy. I think he's the exact same card as he was previously at 3-3, and I don't think anything about this is going to make Strong Guy a better card or make me, the person who loves Strong Guy, actually play more of this card. He's going to be the exact same guy. I don't think they did enough. Death Fractured Frontier is a card I think is largely misapprehended, which is to say, I think the right home for Death Fractured Frontier is something pretty close to the Thanos deck, but with some fusions in it, which is to say the version of the Thanos deck that I showed on my video for Death Fractured Frontier. I think that that deck is pretty close, right? The Thanos deck with Thanos Fractured Frontier, and then you're playing Kid Omega, Venom, and a fastball special just so you can use this as like a sort of small ball Hela. That's what this card is actually supposed to be. I don't think this card is a card that is meant to be a combo card. I think it is a card that is meant to inject some combo outcomes into a mid-range deck, and that's a pretty cool card to exist, but I think that like a lot of people, when they see this card, they basically get one-shotted by the idea that it's Hela, and it's not Hela, and you shouldn't play it like Hela, and that is the mistake that people are making. That said, I do think, going to 5-9 makes it a more compelling mid-range option, but I don't think that it's necessarily doing enough. I would be trying to add more power here, maybe by adding power to the cards that it's reviving, or by creating other cards that are in that Kid Omega Venom vein that allow me to sort of mid-range it up and do things like this. I do think that simultaneously, I think this card is underrated and also not particularly good, but that's a weird dichotomy to hold at once. I do think that, I will at least be trying a little bit of death with this, because I do think that Thanos space is underexplored to begin with, and it did get an extra point of power. Yes, I realize it's weird to say the Thanos space is underexplored because every deck's a Thanos deck at this point, but I do think that that is something that is notable. And we'll circle back to Thanos at the end. Here's where we get to the baffling ones. Spider Sense is going to give +3 power, and in exchange, they were like, oh, clearly we have to nerf it. We can't give it +3 power. I am of the mind that they did not have to do this in any meaningful way. They could have just said goes to +3 power and kept it at 5. I don't know what the point of this would be, and I think that they overcompensated a little bit here, because I don't think the Spider Sense would have been a particularly ridiculous card if it just said +3 on it at 5 and discounted a couple times over the course of you playing a couple movable cards. Because the thing that you'd be worried about with this is the ability to like play a couple movables and then like Maverick and buff the Maverick, and I'm really not worried about that because Maverick's not a movable card, and that means that I'm not discounting it meaningfully. I just don't see what the point of this is. To me, the Aunt May deck is one of the biggest failures to create a new archetype in this year of Marvel Snap. Like, say what you will about cards like Thanos or Gambit or Mother Ascani or Sholau or Stardust, right? Like, or not Stardust, Star-Lord. There are a million things you could say about them, and a lot of those things are bad. But at least they got off the starting line. Like, maybe they pushed too hard on them, but at least they got off the starting line. And a lot of those effects are the kind of effects that create way more non-games than something like Spider Sense, which is a pretty fair buff card. So I just don't understand where the caution comes from. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't think that they should have been this cautious. I think they should have just said +3 and it stays at 5. Another mildly baffling one here. I think this is intended as a buff to Klaw, but I don't know that it actually is one. Klaw going from a 5-cost card to a 4-cost card, but in exchange losing 3 points of power, 2 from his body and 1 from his effect. This is a 4/8? Like, I don't care. I don't care. I'm not playing this. Like, I like Klaw. I would have much rather seen them do something like +1 power to his ability, which is something they did in 2024. And it was like maybe a little too strong then, but now it would be totally fine. We live in a world where Thanos Fractured Frontier is a card, and they're like, I have to nerf Klaw, or like this is somehow a buff to Klaw. I just don't buy it. And as much as I am a defender of the idea that this is a like they should care about series 1 balance and all of that, I do wonder how much their need to carry about Series 1 balance changes the more free cards they give out, right? Like, they may not be doing series drops, but they are giving new players a ton of actually good decks. They're giving out all of these, like, War Machine is now a card that if you're in Series 1, you can see. Thanos the Original is a card. They're going to be giving out a V-Hand deck. There's a Zombies deck. There are going to be a lot of good ass cards in the new player experience now. And I do think that that does entail some degree of like rethinking their policy towards it, because this to me looks like a change that seems like the only explanation for it must be that it was hamstrung by the new player experience, that this was just a situation where they felt like they couldn't actually, with a straight face, make this card much more powerful than this and still have it be a starter card. And I think that is potentially an assumption they should question in the world where they're giving away all the decks that they are giving away. And I do think that that is a particularly meaningful thing, that maybe this, like, there must be something I'm missing here. I was talking about it with Guest and he was like, oh, it's for the data mined card Antipolar Magneto, which pulls 3s and 4s. And it's like, okay, I don't want to pull a 4/8. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to pull a card that's good instead of a 4/8. I don't really get this one at all. And a word on Thanos Fractured Frontier, who I think a lot of people were sort of looking at as a potential nerf target. They described him as healthily strong in this case. And I do think that he probably is. Like, I do believe that Thanos is much more of a king of mid-range style card than he is like actually busted, oh my god. I think there is a combination of his actual power and his incredible appeal that give him the play rate that he has. But I do think that there are a lot of decks for which Thanos is the correct choice, and that can feel a little bit oppressive, especially when you know he's involved in every game, even the ones that you don't draw him, which makes him feel even a little more omnipresent than he already is. I certainly believe that there are vast swaths of the metagame that do not want to play Thanos, and in fact are actually extremely well set up to farm Thanos lists. Most combo decks are going to do very well against mid-range piles of stats, and none of them play Thanos, and pretty much all of them beat him. So I fully believe that if you look at this from a data-driven perspective, you can say, I think Thanos is probably a balanced card, or is a card that is good in a healthy way. That said, I do think there is something to be said for the fact that this is a game on which people really prize having things change, right? A lot of the appeal of Marvel Snap is that things are going to be different, not necessarily week over week, but like month over month. And I do think that there is a point at which Thanos' ubiquity becomes a balance concern in itself. I don't know if that point is now. And I think that a lot of people like talk about this stuff where it's like, oh, okay, they're going to wait a month and then they're going to nerf him when they're not selling him anymore. And it's like, well, sort of. But also, I think the thing that's going on is also that it's tolerable to have a card be ubiquitous for a certain amount of time, and it becomes less tolerable the longer that's true. And I think that that is a very reasonable way to try to approach a game like this. I don't know that they do it or anything like that, but it could result in similar outcomes. And I think they should be aware of that, right? Like, I think that if that is the correct thing to do, I think you should be communicating that and like talking about how we think about things like that, because otherwise people are just going to be like, oh yeah, Thanos, well, they're not selling him in 2 weeks. He's getting nerfed in 2 weeks. And like, for what it's worth, I would have nerfed him now. That's just me. I would have taken a point of power off of him because I think it's probably pretty free to do that. And I think it would have given, a relative signal. I don't think Thanos is overpowered to the degree that previous cards were. And I think that he is an eminently solvable problem if you believe that he is. But I do think that it is the kind of thing that can cause the player base to think about things in certain ways that you as a company probably don't want them getting, I guess my thing is basically, I think Thanos is the right power level, and I'd like other cards to go up to that power level. But seeing what they did to Klaw doesn't give me confidence that they'll do that, right? Like, what I would say is that if you're going to be like, we like Thanos, we think he's healthy, buff some other 5s, right? Like, make Klaw better 5. But instead, they're doing this, and I'm a little perturbed by it. That's really all I've got on this. As always, I'm KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I'll see you in the next one.